Third, at 18, Lila had already learned that in a drought-stricken land, daughters could become bargaining chips as easily as cattle or rifles. And on the morning her father traded her for a horse, the sky above the red desert was the color of old copper. Heavy and silent, as if it too refused to witness the exchange. She stood beside the splintered fence of their failing homestead, her hand steady even though her heart felt like it was breaking in slow, deliberate cracks, and watched the solitary Apache warrior who had come to claim the bargain. A tall, broad-shouldered man known among settlers only in whispers. A man who rode alone across mesas and through canyon shadows. His expression carved from stone and wind. His eyes sharp yet unreadable. And when the reins of the powerful black stallion were placed in her father's trembling hands, she understood that there would be no protest loud enough to undo what hunger and desperation had decided. So she lifted her chin and stepped forward on her own, refusing to be dragged like something unwanted, refusing to let the last piece of her dignity be traded away with the rest. The warrior did not touch her at first, only gestured toward his horse, and when she mounted, he swung up behind her with quiet strength, guiding the stallion away from the only home she had known, across a landscape painted with towering buttes and endless sky, where silence felt alive and every gust of wind carried secrets. She expected cruelty, expected rough hands and colder words. Yet the journey to his distant camp was marked not by violence, but by an unsettling restraint, as though he were studying her courage the way a hunter studies the horizon. And when night fell and they made camp beneath a spill of brilliant stars, he built a fire and offered her water before speaking his first words, his voice low and steady, as he told her his name was Dakota and that no one would harm her under his protection. She did not believe him at first, for promises had already failed her once. But there was something in the way he kept his distance, in the way he looked at her not as property but as a storm he was trying to understand, that planted the smallest seed of uncertainty inside her anger. Days passed as they traveled deeper into the wild country where sandstone cliffs rose like ancient guardians and eagles circled high above. And Lila's fear slowly transformed into wary observation, noticing how Dakota hunted with precision, how he spoke to his horse in soft murmurs, how he watched the horizon not out of suspicion for her escape but out of vigilance against unseen threats. When they finally reached his remote dwelling tucked between canyon walls, she realized he truly lived as the rumors claimed, alone, self-sufficient, untouched by either settler towns or tribal gatherings, and the isolation frightened her more than any crowded village might have. Yet that first evening in his shelter, as a storm rolled over the cliffs and thunder shook the earth, he offered her blankets and turned his back to give her privacy, sleeping near the entrance like a sentinel rather than a captor. The nights that followed were not the endless torment she had imagined, but long hours of shared silence, of whispered stories exchanged by firelight, of two wounded souls circling one another carefully. And though he eventually drew her into his arms when the desert cold grew sharp and unforgiving, it was not with possession but with warmth. His embrace steady and protective, his breath slow against her hair as if he were anchoring himself as much as sheltering her. And Lila found herself caught between resentment for the bargain that brought her there and a dawning awareness that the solitary warrior carried his own loneliness like an old scar. She learned of the losses that had driven him from his people, of battles that had taken his family, of the silence he chose because grief had once been too loud, and in those quiet, starlit hours when the world narrowed to the flicker of embers and the rhythm of two heartbeats beneath heavy blankets, she began to understand that she had not been taken to be broken, but perhaps to be rebuilt alongside him. And somewhere between the echo of coyotes and the hush of desert wind, Lila realized that fate had given her not to a monster, but to a man who guarded his heart as fiercely as he guarded the canyon passes. And as the first chapter of her new life unfolded beneath an endless sky, she stood at the edge of something unexpected, not captivity, But transformation, the desert has a way of stripping away illusions. And in the weeks that followed, Lila discovered that survival beside Dakota demanded strength she had never been allowed to claim back home. Rising before dawn to fetch water from a narrow stream hidden between rocks. Learning which plants healed and which poisoned. Listening as he taught her the language of wind patterns and distant hoofbeats. And though she had once believed her life ended the day she was traded for a horse, she now felt something startlingly close to awakening. As she moved through the rugged terrain with growing confidence. Her laughter, once rare, beginning to echo against canyon walls. Yet peace in such a land is fragile. And rumors of encroaching soldiers and restless outlaws drifted through the desert like smoke, forcing Dakota to prepare for threats that could arrive without warning. And when danger finally came in the form of armed men tracking him for old grudges, it was Lila who first spotted the dust cloud rising on the horizon. Her voice steady as she alerted him. No longer the frightened girl of 18, but a woman who understood the stakes of the life she had chosen to remain in. Together they fortified their shelter. Their movements synchronized in a way that spoke of trust forged not through obligation but through shared hardship. And when confrontation proved inevitable, Dakota urged her to flee to a hidden ravine he had shown her weeks before. Yet she refused to abandon him, standing at his side with a rifle in trembling yet determined hands, proving that she was not an item traded but a partner standing by choice. The clash that followed was swift and fierce, echoing through the canyon with sharp reports and shouted commands. But the attackers, unprepared for resistance from both warrior and woman, retreated into the dust from which they had come, leaving behind silence and the realization that Lila had crossed an invisible threshold from survival to belonging. That night, as adrenaline faded and the enormity of what they had defended settled over them, Dakota pulled her close, not in desperation but in reverence, his forehead resting against hers as if silently acknowledging that she had saved more than their shelter. She had saved the fragile hope growing between them. And beneath a sky ablaze with stars, their closeness carried tenderness rather than transaction. A union defined by mutual choice and deepening affection rather than the cruel bargain that first bound their paths. Seasons shifted, painting the desert in new shades of gold and crimson. And the solitary warrior was no longer entirely solitary, his laughter more frequent. His watchful gaze softened when it settled on Lila as she moved confidently through the land. Her spirit no longer caged by circumstance but strengthened by resilience. And she often thought back to that morning by the fence, when she believed her life had been reduced to a trade, realizing now that destiny sometimes disguises opportunity as loss. Their story, forged in hardship and sealed by trust, became a testament to the power of courage and unexpected love in the harshest of places. And as you reach the end of this chapter, remember that the strongest journeys often begin where comfort ends. So if this tale of resilience, redemption, and fierce devotion stirred something in you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for more unforgettable stories where broken beginnings rise into powerful new destinies beneath wide and endless skies.